was your reaction to the president's speech this afternoon?
Well, this is a really important event because President Biden is meeting with all of the NATO leaders. And the thing that President Biden has emphasized is the importance of the NATO countries being unified in their response to Russia. And so this was a coalescing of each of the leaders in order to discuss their strategy, in order to make sure they're still on the same page and to agree on what are the next steps in terms of retaliating against Russia. And then notably, what President Biden said in response to questions after his speech is that he expects that sanctions is not always a deterrent, but the maintenance of sanctions and increasingly ratcheting up the sanctions is what he thinks will cause a country like Russia to back off. And so he's committed to that strategy. Of course, the other part of the response that's very crucial for the resistance in Ukraine is making sure that NATO continues to supply weapons to the resistance fighters in Ukraine, because they've been so important in terms of allowing the Ukrainian fighters to hold back Russia in its invasion.
Certainly today, David, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and our allies in NATO pledging more sanctions against Russia. Can we expect even more to come in the days and weeks ahead, knowing that Putin has not showed any signs of backing down just yet?
I think it depends now a lot on what Putin does, right? Because Putin and Russia are in talks with the president of Ukraine and the president of Ukraine's negotiating team about a potential peace agreement, but they don't seem to be making progress. And I think we should have a healthy amount of skepticism about whether Putin is really bargaining in good faith in that peace agreement. But meanwhile, on the ground in Ukraine, Russia is still not making progress. So their goal, of course, was to take over the big cities in Ukraine, and they failed to do that in any big city. And I was just in Ukraine, just got back a few hours ago to here in Poland, and people in Ukraine are very confident that they're going to continue to keep up this level of resistance and push back against Russia. And they think that they're still taking back some of the territory that Russia took on early on, including in suburbs around Kiev. So they're very confident. But their confidence, of course, depends on still being able to get humanitarian supplies and weapons from NATO.
That's right. 10 million plus displaced because of this war, with millions fleeing, many of them women and children. Of course, President Biden pledging more aid to fight this humanitarian crisis and accepting 100,000 Ukraine refugees. Does more need to be done as Russia is still in the country?
I expect there will be more that needs to be done. I'm in Poland. Over 2 million Ukrainian refugees have come here. I'm on a border town where a lot of them are coming in. We saw many streaming across the border today as we came across the border. And as things heat up more in Ukraine and new towns get attacked by Russia, more people will flee. So that requires a massive support mechanism in order to receive these refugees. But I would note there are a lot of NGOs and civil society agencies that are here, and there's a warm reception for refugees. They're making sure they get placed into temporary shelter and then being moved to more permanent shelter. And the U.S. receiving 100,000 and many European countries receiving many others to be resettled in those countries is also an important part of making sure these refugees get taken care of until the situation in Ukraine is resolved.
Of course, we also heard the president today, David, say that if Russia is found to have used chemical weapons, the U.S. and our allies will respond. Do you think that would include actually sending troops, American and NATO troops, into the country of Ukraine, which we haven't seen thus far?
He was specifically asked that question. If Russia uses chemical weapons or biological weapons, will the U.S. respond militarily? And he said that the response would be based on the level of use and how it was used. So he didn't answer that question directly. And so we don't know what the answer is. He only committed to the fact that the U.S. would retaliate along with NATO partners if Russia does use chemical or biological weapons.
You're just coming back from Poland, of course, where 2 million of these refugees are housed. We appreciate you taking the time to join us in such a tight turnaround. The president journeying to Poland tomorrow, expected potentially to actually see some of these refugees on the ground there as the crisis does continue. What's the message that President Biden needs to leave in the country that you just came from?
Well, so I actually just came from Ukraine. I came across the border into Poland. I'm in Poland now. And when President Biden meets with President Duda, the president of Poland, I expect he'll have a couple of messages. One is of gratitude because Poland has taken the majority of refugees who have come out of Ukraine. And the Polish response to the crisis has been pretty amazing, to be frank. And people here are, so available and so hospitable to all the Ukrainians who've come over. And also, President Biden needs to talk to Poland about the supply routes, because many of the supplies, both humanitarian supplies and military equipment and defensive equipment, are going through Poland and supply routes into Ukraine. And I think they want to make sure that they're going to continue to ensure those supply routes are open and safe and secure so that the Ukrainians can get what they need through Poland.
All right, David Tafuri, former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor and former State Department official. David, we appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.